Family is supposed to be where you find your way back home. But for me, it was a trap disguised as smiles and glasses of red wine. I never imagined that one simple switch would change everything forever. I am Liam Carter, 34 years old, living alone in a penthouse overlooking South Beach, Miami. Last year, I walked away from the Carter Resorts empire, the family business I was born into after selling my 30% stake for $7.5 million. It was more than enough to secure my independence for life. No board meetings, no family politics, no need to ever lift another finger. $7.5 million in the bank, no wife, no kids, and on paper, life couldn't look any better. But real life, it's messier than that. My relationship with my father, Thomas Carter, is the single blot of ink that stains this otherwise perfect chapter. Once known as the king of Miami hospitality, he built Carter Resorts from the ground up. But after years of bad deals, gambling on failing properties and burning bridges in the industry, he became bitter, manipulative, and cold. He doesn't try to control my life. No, that would be too obvious. He controls something far more valuable to him, my bank account. In his eyes, I'm not his son. I'm a walking checkbook, just another financial asset in his failing empire. This morning, I stood in front of the mirror, fixing the crisp white dress shirt my mother once told me was her favorite on me. Today is her 65th birthday, and like every year, the family will gather at the Carter Estate, our oceanfront family villa on the outskirts of Key Biscayne, south of Miami Beach. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the weight pressing on my chest, the same weight that returns every time I think about facing him again. Thomas Carter, the man who never hugged me, never asked if I was okay, and never once looked at me as a son. Only as a safe he couldn't quite crack open all the way. But honestly, even that, the manipulation, the control was still kinder than the hell he put me through when I was just a kid. Thomas Carter wasn't just ruthless in business. He was an alcoholic. And when the bourbon hit his veins, so did the violence. No reason, no warning. I'd hear the ice clinking in his glass and I knew what was coming. He'd grab me by the collar, drag me across the marble floors of that villa, and hit me until his rage burned out. Those memories, they aren't just ghosts. They're scars, deep, permanent, and ugly. And every time I step foot back into that house, they start to bleed all over again. I steered my Mercedes G-Wagon down the familiar palm-lined road leading to the Carter Estate, sunlight flickering through the windshield like little shards of glass. I turned up the music, some old Sinatra playing on the radio, desperately trying to drown out the storm inside my head. But nothing really worked. When I finally pulled up in front of the massive white Mediterranean-style villa, there she was, my mother, Elizabeth Carter, standing on the porch under the golden Florida sun. Her smile hit me like a wave of warmth I didn't deserve. "Liam, you made it." She rushed to me, wrapping me in her arms, her signature vanilla and lavender perfume washing over me like a balm on old wounds. For a moment, just a moment, the world felt safe again. The garden party was already in full swing in the backyard overlooking the Atlantic. Fairy lights and lanterns floated above, swaying gently in the ocean breeze. Laughter, champagne glasses clinking, and the soft notes of a live jazz band playing "Fly Me to the Moon" filled the air. And at the center of it all, Elizabeth Carter, my mother, the queen of this broken empire, radiant in a soft silver gown, her hair swept up like a movie star from the 60s. At 65, she still carried herself with the grace of royalty. Her brown eyes, warm and alive, scanned the crowd, not looking for applause but for family. She was the light in that dark house. She was the only reason I ever came back. I stood there for a moment just watching her. Elizabeth Carter, my mother, the only lighthouse left in the raging sea of this family. No matter how many businesses crumbled, how many lies were told, or how far I tried to run, she remained my anchor. And then there was him, standing like a ghost in the shadows. Thomas Carter, my father, holding his signature glass of Bordeaux, red wine, his icy blue eyes sweeping over the guests like a hawk circling prey. He wore his usual tailored gray suit, looking every bit the dignified tycoon the tabloids still like to worship. But that smile on his face, God, that smile could freeze boiling water. I kept my distance, focused on small talk with uncles, aunts, distant cousins I barely remembered. But no matter how hard I tried, I could feel his stare cutting through the crowd, never letting me go. Liam. His voice sliced through the air just as I was reaching for a slice of birthday cake at the buffet. I turned slowly. He was there, right in front of me. Another glass of red wine in his hand, deeper, darker, richer than the one he'd been sipping all evening. Have a drink with your father, son. This one's special. He lingered on that word, his smirk widening, and I felt the knot tighten in my stomach. I took the glass, gripping it a little too tight. Thank you. Father, I managed to say, my voice steady on the surface, but my heart pounding like a drum. Just a few feet away, my mother was laughing softly with Aunt Vivian, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just a breath away. I didn't want to ruin her night, not yet. I lifted the glass, the crimson liquid catching the light like liquid rubies, and took a small sip. It tasted rich, full-bodied, a little bitter on the finish, but nothing felt unusual. I looked up at him. He nodded slowly like a man who had just sealed a deal. Minutes later, it hit me. My vision blurred. The laughter and music faded into a distant echo. My heart raced like it was trying to break out of my chest. I struggled to breathe as if the air had been sucked out of the garden. Mom. I choked out trying to reach her, but my legs wouldn't move. The glass slipped from my hands, shattering on the soft grass beneath me. The last thing I heard before the darkness swallowed me was my mother's voice screaming my name. When I came to, I was lying on the old mahogany bed in the guest suite upstairs. My head throbbed, my body heavy, like all the life had been drained out of me. And there she was, Elizabeth Carter, sitting at my bedside, her hands clutching mine so tightly her eyes swollen from crying. Liam, thank God you're awake. Her voice trembled like she had just survived a nightmare. And maybe we both had. Liam, are you okay? Oh God, I was so scared. Her voice cracked like glass under pressure. She sat on the edge of the bed, gripping my hand like she might lose me if she let go. What? What happened? My voice was barely a whisper, my mind spinning, trying to piece the fragments together, the glass of wine. My father's smirk, the dizziness, and then blackness. I turned my eyes toward her, silently begging for an answer. But she just shook her head softly, brushing my hair away from my face like she used to when I was little, as if she could still shield me from monsters. But this monster was already in our house. You collapsed right there in the garden. Your father told everyone you drank too much. But I know you, Liam. You didn't. You only had one glass, didn't you? Her voice quivered, her brown eyes wide and frightened. I nodded slowly, my throat dry as sandpaper. One glass, I whispered back, my hand tightening around hers. Silence, except for the faint, almost mocking ticking of the vintage clock on the wall. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her everything was fine, but how could I when I couldn't even convince myself? That glass, that smirk, the way my body shut down like someone had flipped a switch. None of it made sense. Yet. She stood up slowly, her steps quiet but heavy. She walked over to the large arched window, staring out at the moonlit garden, the very spot where I had collapsed hours earlier. Her voice dropped to a whisper, like she was afraid the walls might hear her. What you felt? The spinning, the shortness of breath, the way you collapsed. I've seen it before. She turned to look at me, her face pale, her lips trembling. It was just like my father. I froze, my blood turning cold, my heart hammering in my chest. Grandfather, I croaked out, barely recognizing my own voice. I'd only met Richard Lancaster, my mother's father, a handful of times when I was a boy. I remembered a tall, booming man with a laugh that could fill an entire room, a man larger than life in my childish eyes. But all I really knew was that he had died suddenly years before I was old enough to understand loss. A heart attack. That's what I'd always been told. My mother turned back to me, her eyes rimmed red, her hands clenched so tightly they were almost white. Yes, she whispered, her voice brittle. He collapsed, just like you did. It happened after a night of drinking with friends. He was healthy, Liam, strong as ever, no illnesses, no warning signs. But the next morning, he was gone. Her voice broke each word, feeling like it had been dug up from a grave she'd tried to leave undisturbed for decades. I stood walk to her, slowly placing a steady hand on her trembling shoulder. Mom, I don't think this is illness. The words nearly caught in my throat. I could feel the weight of them, the danger of even saying them out loud. But when I looked into her eyes filled with both terror and a desperate flicker of hope, I knew I had to say it. You know I get checked all the time. My heart, my blood, everything. There's nothing wrong with me. Nothing hereditary. Her lips parted as if to say something, but no words came. Her eyes widened like she had just stumbled onto the edge of a cliff she never wanted to see. Then, what do you think happened? She whispered, barely audible. I took a deep breath, feeling like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't take back once I crossed it. Mom, I think there was something wrong with that glass of wine Dad gave me. The words felt too real, too sharp, the kind you couldn't shove back into your mouth once they were out. I watched as she staggered back, her hand flying to her mouth, her face draining of color. Liam, what are you saying? That's your father. Her voice cracked like glass under pressure. But in her eyes I saw it. That tiny flicker of doubt she had tried so hard to bury. I know, I whispered, trying to steady my voice. But you heard him, didn't you? The way he kept pushing that glass toward me, calling it special. I drank it, and I collapsed. I wasn't drunk, Mom. You know me. I barely touched it, just one sip. I paused, meeting her eyes, forcing her to see what we both knew but didn't want to say. You thought it was strange too, didn't you? He told everyone I drank too much, but you knew the truth. She sank into the armchair like her legs had given out, her trembling hands clutching the delicate porcelain teacup, the steam from the untouched tea curling into the air between us. Silence, but I could see it, the war raging behind her eyes. 35 years of loyalty clashing with something far older, a mother's instinct to protect her child. I, I don't want to believe it, she finally whispered, her voice breaking like the first crack in a dam. But it's true. I knew something was wrong. He kept insisting you were drunk, but when I looked at you, I knew you weren't. We sat there in paralyzed silence like two shipwreck survivors clutching the same piece of driftwood, adrift in a sea of fear. I reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly, anchoring us both to something, anything that felt real. Mom, I'll find out what happened. I don't want to believe it's Dad, but I need to know the truth. Her face crumpled, tears pooling in her eyes but refusing to fall. She nodded, voice breaking, as she reached out to cup my face the way she used to when I was a boy. Be careful, Liam. If you're right, I won't let anyone hurt you again. As I left the Carter estate, the ocean breeze hitting my face like cold reality, I felt both relieved and burdened. At least she believed me, even if just a little. But that small crack in her trust toward my father felt like a crack in the foundation of everything our family pretended to be. I drove the coastal highway back toward Miami, the neon lights of South Beach flickering in the distance, my chest burning with a single relentless resolve I was going to uncover the truth, no matter how dark or how dangerous. But in the days that followed, I felt like I was walking a tightrope strung between madness and reality. Each step shaky, uncertain, terrified. My father's cold smile, the way he had pushed that special glass toward me, haunted every waking moment. I wanted to forget it, wanted to tell myself it was just paranoia. But every time I stood in front of the mirror, staring into my own reflection, I saw the same thing staring back at me, the eyes of a man who couldn't stand still. And then, Thanksgiving arrived, bringing with it the sharp November chill that somehow made the Miami air feel colder than usual. A few days later, my phone rang. It was her, my mother. Her voice was soft, but I could hear it, that fragile thread of hope she was trying so hard to hold on to. Liam, come home for dinner, will you? Just one evening, for me. I wanted to say no. I wanted to stay as far away from that cursed house as possible. But how could I say no to her? I'll come, I whispered, even though my heart sank like a stone the moment I hung up. At night, the Carter estate rose out of the dusk like a castle on the edge of a cliff, its glowing windows casting soft light onto the manicured lawn. It looked inviting, but I knew better. I stepped through the grand front doors, the familiar smell of roasted turkey, pumpkin pie, and cinnamon filling the air. But it didn't warm me. Not this time. My mother met me at the door, her smile as bright as ever, but her eyes told a different story, a quiet storm brewing beneath. She pulled me into a hug, but even in her embrace, I could feel the tension humming in the air like static. And there he was, Thomas Carter, sitting at the head of the long mahogany dining table, a glass of deep red wine in his hand, his gray suit sharp as ever, not a hair out of place. Liam, he called out smoothly, his voice oozing mock concern. Feeling better after that little fall in the garden? His words dripped with mockery, as if he already knew I had pieced together the truth. I sat across from him, forcing myself to keep my face neutral, though my hands clenched under the table nails, digging into my palms just to keep myself from shaking. My mother moved between the kitchen and dining room, chatting with Aunt Vivian, placing dishes on the table, desperately trying to pretend this was just another family dinner. But I wasn't listening to any of it. All I could focus on was him. His eyes never left me, watching, waiting, like a wolf circling its prey. When the main course hit the table, the golden turkey, the stuffing, the gravy, Thomas stood up. He raised his glass, his eyes locked on mine, like crosshairs on a target. To family. To Thanksgiving. And then with a smile like a knife, he picked up another glass of bun, a fresh pour darker, thicker, red as blood. Here, Liam. This one's special. To family, to Thanksgiving. He said it like a toast, but his eyes, they were locked on me like a loaded gun. He handed me the glass, the candlelight catching the deep red liquid, making it glint like fresh blood. Drink, Liam. This one's special. That word again, special, just like that night in the garden. My heart thundered in my chest. Every nerve in my body screamed no. I knew this was it. I knew this was his move. I took the glass, my fingers trembling, just enough for him to notice and smirk. Mom was still in the kitchen, her back turned, fetching dessert blissfully unaware. And then he leaned in slightly, his stare daring me to take that sip. Not this time. I pretended to drop my napkin, leaned down, and in a single silent motion, I swapped our glasses under the cover of the tablecloth. Lightning fast, unnoticed. I sat back up, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, sweat prickling my skin. He raised his glass, the one meant for me, and took a long, confident sip. Then, without so much as a glance, he turned to chat with Uncle Ray, completely unaware. I gripped his glass, now sitting in front of me, and didn't drink. I just waited. 10 minutes. Nothing. 20. Still nothing. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've lost my mind. But then 45 minutes in, he froze. Mid-sentence, his hand shot to his chest, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Thomas, what's wrong? My mother's voice cracked as she rushed to his side, panic spreading across her face. He staggered, dropping the wine glass, the sound of it shattering on the floor. His face turned ashen, his body collapsing in slow motion onto the floor. Dad? My mother screamed, her voice slicing through the air like glass breaking. The table erupted into chaos. Aunt Vivian was on the phone yelling for an ambulance. I shot to my feet, but not in fear. No. It was because a horrifying truth was blooming in my mind like poisoned roots. The dizziness, the shortness of breath, the collapse, just like me, on Mom's birthday, just like Grandpa, as she had described. Call an ambulance now. My voice cut through the panic, but my eyes never left him. Thomas Carter lay sprawled on the floor, his breathing shallow, his glassy eyes locked right on me. And in that moment I saw it. Panic, recognition. He knew. He knew exactly what he had just drunk. The paramedics stormed in minutes later, working quickly to stabilize him before whisking him away. My mother gripped my arm, her body shaking, her voice a broken whisper. Liam, what's happening? Why is this happening? I held her tightly, but my mind was spinning like a hurricane. If I hadn't switched the glasses, I'd be the one on that floor. The realization sliced through me like a blade. I leaned in, my voice low, barely more than a breath. Mom, I need to get a sample of that wine. Her eyes widened in horror, but she nodded because deep down she knew it too. Later that night, when the house had emptied, the guests long gone, and the chaos settled into silence, I crept back to the dining table, my heart pounding with every step. There it was, the glass, still on the floor, broken, but not empty. I gathered what was left, carefully funneling the dark red liquid into a small glass vial I had found in one of the kitchen drawers. I tucked it deep into my coat pocket, feeling like I was carrying a live grenade. That night, sleep never came. I lay on my bed, back in Miami, staring at the ceiling, playing it over and over again. His collapse, his eyes, the wine, the truth I could no longer deny. He had tried to kill me, and now I had to prove it. The days that followed were torture. Not because I was running from him, but because I was trapped with my own thoughts. I lived like a fugitive in my own skin, haunted by the memory of his body hitting the floor, haunted by the small glass vial hidden in my closet, the only proof I had. Every night I lay awake wondering if I had imagined it all, or if I had truly stared death in the face and barely walked away. But I knew I couldn't stop now. Not when I was this close to the truth. Even if it meant shattering what little was left of my family, I had to know. I contacted a private lab in Miami, a quiet off-the-books place recommended by friends in the tech scene, people who understood discretion was worth more than gold. I didn't trust shipping the vial. Too risky, too easy to intercept. So I drove it there myself, the tiny glass container sitting in my coat pocket like a live explosive. The technician, a middle-aged woman with thick-rimmed glasses and tired eyes, looked at me curiously when I handed it over. "I need this tested," I said, trying to keep my voice from cracking. "Anything unusual?" "And fast." She nodded silently, no questions asked. 3 days. Those 3 days felt like 3 years. I barricaded myself in my penthouse, drew the blackout curtains, and sat in the dark like a prisoner, half expecting my father to burst through the door at any second. On the second night, my phone rang. It was Mom. Her voice was small, stretched thin by worry. "Liam, your father's stable. The hospital says he went into shock, but they can't explain why." She paused, her voice catching slightly. "Do you know anything?" I could hear it in her tone, the crack in her trust growing wider. But I couldn't tell her. Not yet. Not until I was sure. "I'm looking into it, Mom. Don't worry." But the truth was I was the one drowning in worry. The call that changed everything. On the third day, my phone rang again. It was the lab. The technician's voice was cold professional, but I could feel the weight of what she wasn't saying. "Mr. Carter, we have the results. You should come in." My heart slammed against my ribs as I grabbed my keys and raced through the Miami traffic. When I arrived, she didn't waste a second. She handed me a thin report, her finger landing on a bolded line halfway down the page. "Barbiturate. High concentration." I stared at her, not understanding at first. "It's a sedative," she explained flatly. "In high doses, it can cause unconsciousness or death if not treated quickly." The paper shook in my hand, my vision blurring with disbelief. Barbiturate. Not alcohol, not stress, not illness. Poison. Deliberate. Calculated. And I knew exactly who had done it. I looked at her, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Thank you. Don't tell anyone about this." She nodded sympathy, softening her features. The drive back, realization hits. I drove aimlessly, circling the city as the pieces clicked together in my mind like a lock finally snapping open. Thomas Carter, my father, the man I had spent a lifetime trying to earn approval from. And then it hit me like a freight train. $7+ million. No wife, no kids, no legal heirs. Except him. If I died, he'd get it all. It wasn't about control anymore. It was about elimination. I pulled over near Biscayne Bay, stepping out onto the edge of the rocky shoreline, the cold Atlantic wind whipping through my hair. The waves crashed, but I felt nothing except the rage boiling inside me. He had tried to kill me, not once, but twice. And if I hadn't switched the glasses, I'd be the one buried in the ground right now. I gripped the lab report so tightly it nearly crumpled in my fist. No more running. No more guessing. I was going to face him. Not for revenge, but because my mother and I deserved to be free. 1 week later, he was discharged from the hospital. A week later, looking thinner, paler, but those icy blue eyes were still sharp enough to cut glass. My mother called asking me to visit. Her voice was soft, but I heard the dread she tried to hide. Liam, your father's home. I knew this wouldn't be a visit, it was a reckoning. I slipped the lab report into my coat pocket, clutching it like a shield made of paper. As I walked up the steps of the Carter estate, the weight in my chest grew heavier with every step. Inside the house, I found my mother in the kitchen, gently preparing tea like this was any other Sunday. Liam, you're here. She smiled, but behind that smile, I could see the sadness settling into her face like storm clouds. He's in the living room. I nodded, my throat tight, and walked toward the dark oak doors. There he was, Thomas Carter, the king of nothing, sitting in his leather armchair, a glass of red wine swirling lazily in his hand like none of this had ever happened. Liam, his voice oozed with that fake warmth, the kind that made your skin crawl. Come to visit your old man. That's good of you. I didn't sit. I didn't smile. We need to talk, privately. He arched a brow, gesturing toward the seat across from him. I didn't move. I reached into my coat, pulled out the folded lab report, and dropped it on the table between us. I leaned in, my voice low and cold as stone. Barbiturate, in the wine you gave me on Thanksgiving. Enough to kill a man. For the first time, his smirk faltered. His body stiffened, but he quickly forced a laugh. What are you talking about? Poison, Liam, you've lost your damn mind. But that laugh, it wasn't real. It cracked at the edges like a mask about to shatter. Don't lie. My voice was dead calm, but my rage burned like wildfire underneath. Liam narrowed his eyes, his voice tightening like a blade pressed to skin. I swapped the glasses with you. That's why you collapsed, not me. I have proof. The lab confirmed it. If you don't tell me the truth right now, I'm going straight to the police. The room fell into crushing silence. The only sound was the old clock ticking on the mantel and the ragged sound of Thomas Carter's breathing. For a moment, Liam thought he might deny it again. But then, like a dam breaking, Thomas slumped forward in his chair, his face buried in his hands. His voice cracked, barely a whisper. Liam, forgive me. I never meant to hurt you like that. I just needed you unconscious. I was going to forge the will. Take everything. I'm drowning in debt, Liam. I didn't see another way out. Liam stood frozen, staring at the man who used to seem larger than life. Now all he saw was a broken shell hollowed out by greed and desperation. The confession hit hard, cutting deeper than any of the beatings from his childhood ever had. But strangest of all, what rose inside him wasn't fury, it was an ache so heavy it almost made him sink to his knees. Why, he whispered hoarsely. Why, Dad, I'm your son. Thomas didn't lift his head. He just shook, silent tears streaming down his face. Liam's fists clenched at his sides. He thought of his mother, the years she had spent living with this man, loving him, trusting him. He wanted to call the police to end this right here, right now, but he knew it would destroy her. His voice trembled as he spoke again, but every word carried the finality of a closing door. I won't go to the police. Not for now, but listen to me and listen well. Stay away from me. Stay away from Mom. You're done. Without waiting for a response, Liam turned on his heel and walked away, leaving his father alone in that cold, hollow room. As he stepped into the hallway, his breath caught in his throat. His mother stood there, her hands gripping the doorframe so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Her eyes were red, swollen, filled with a pain that told him she had heard every word. He crossed the space between them and pulled her into his arms. She trembled as she clung to him, whispering his name, but she didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. They both knew that nothing in their world would ever be the same again. I left the living room, leaving my father sitting there, his head bowed like a broken statue. His confession kept echoing in my mind, each word cutting deeper than the last. I thought confronting him would bring some kind of peace, but all it left was a cold, sinking weight I couldn't shake. As I stepped into the hallway trying to hold myself together, I saw her. My mother. Standing in the kitchen doorway, her fingers digging into the frame, her face pale as if the life had been drained from her. Liam, her voice trembled, her eyes glassy and swollen with tears. I stopped in my tracks. She had heard everything. The confrontation, the confession, all of it. I walked toward her slow and heavy and pulled her into my arms. She collapsed against me, trembling like she might fall apart right there in my arms. Mom, I'm sorry. She shook her head, her voice cracking like it carried the weight of a lifetime. I never imagined Thomas could do this. I held her tighter, not knowing what else to say, and led her outside to the garden. The lanterns from her birthday were still swaying gently in the night breeze, their glow faint but steady. We sat down on the old wooden bench beneath the oak tree. The only sound was the soft rustling of the leaves and the distant waves from the shoreline. I held her hand, waiting for her to speak. Finally, she took a deep breath, her voice steadier than before. Liam, I heard everything, she whispered. What your father said, I still can't believe it. She pulled back just enough to look me in the eye. I saw something there, pain, yes, but also something sharper. Resolve, there's something I've never told you. I held my breath. The symptoms you had, the dizziness, the breathlessness, the collapse. Liam, they were exactly like what happened to my father. I felt my chest tighten. Grandpa, I asked, my voice barely holding together. She nodded slowly, swallowing hard as if forcing herself to relive it. He collapsed too, after an evening of drinking, with Thomas. She paused, closing her eyes for a long moment before forcing herself to go on. They said it was a heart attack. Everyone believed that. But I always found it strange. He was healthy. No heart problems, no illnesses. And after he died, Thomas inherited nearly everything. My family's entire estate. The blood drained from my face. You think Dad killed Grandpa? I asked, almost afraid of hearing her answer. Tears broke free, running down her cheeks as she nodded. I didn't want to believe it, she whispered, choking back a sob. I loved him. I built my life with him. I wanted to trust him. But now I'm afraid I've been living with a monster. Her words hit like a winter gust, ripping away the last pieces of the man I once tried to call Dad. I pulled her back into my arms, holding her like I never wanted to let go. Mom, if you're right, we have to find the truth. Not just for me, but for Grandpa. And for you. She nodded against my shoulder, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. I'll help you, Liam, whatever it takes. No matter what happens, I want to know the truth, she whispered. We sat there under the faint light of the lanterns, mother and son, no longer just family, but allies in a battle neither of us ever imagined we'd have to fight. I knew the road ahead would rip open old wounds, but for the first time I wasn't afraid. Not with her beside me. The next morning, without another word, we began. We didn't talk much, just moved like two soldiers on a silent mission. I told her we should start with the safe in Dad's study, the place where he kept all the important documents. She agreed, though I noticed the way her hand trembled as she unlocked the door. I haven't been in here in a long time, she said quietly. Thomas never liked me touching his things. The safe sat in the corner like a silent threat, a heavy block of cold steel. My mother knelt in front of it, her fingers hovering over the keypad. I watched as she typed in the code. Their wedding date. It made my chest tighten like someone had driven a nail through it. Inside, we found stacks of property deeds, contracts, investment records. But tucked in the very back was something older. A leather-bound notebook worn at the edges. This was my father's journal, my mother whispered, holding it with both hands like it might fall apart if she wasn't careful. We flipped through the yellowed pages until one entry stopped us cold. Thomas is acting strange. Last night after a glass of wine, I felt dizzy, short of breath. I suspect he means me harm. If anything happens to me, investigate. We froze, staring at the words as if they had just leapt off the page to choke us. My grandfather had seen it coming. He had left us this warning, and no one had listened. I looked at my mother. She looked at me. Neither of us could speak. The truth was right there in ink, staring us down like a ghost. Mom, we need experts, I said firmly. I contacted Mr. Harris, a private investigator who had once helped a friend of mine win a brutal legal battle. I also called Anna Bennett, a sharp, fearless attorney who specialized in criminal cases. Both agreed to meet us the next day. When we told them everything, Harris leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. You'll need more than testimony, he said. If your grandfather's body was buried, and if there's any chance toxins are still present, we can petition to exhume the remains and run a modern autopsy. If there was poison traces, could still be found, even after all these years, Harris assured us. With Anna's help, we pushed for a court order. It wasn't easy and the process dragged on for weeks, but eventually the authorization came through. The exhumation felt like digging up more than just a body. It felt like digging up every lie that had rotted beneath our family for decades. When the final autopsy report arrived, it hit us like a tidal wave. My grandfather had been poisoned. The report listed a powerful sedative closely related to barbiturate, exactly like what had nearly killed me. It wasn't a heart attack. It had never been a heart attack. We kept digging. Harris unearthed documents that should never have passed legal review, mismatched signatures, property transfers that didn't add up, forged agreements. One by one, the pieces stacked up until there was no doubt left. Every page, every signature, every uncovered lie built a wall of guilt that closed in around Thomas Carter. My mother sat beside me late into the night reading through the evidence. I watched her face harden with every document. I lived with him for over 30 years, she whispered, her voice breaking. And I never knew. I squeezed her hand. It's not your fault, Mom. He fooled us both. But there was no more grief in her eyes. What I saw instead was fire, determination. She wasn't a wife anymore. She was a mother, a daughter seeking justice. I'll sue him, she said, her voice as steady as stone. Not just for you, but for my father. Thomas has to pay. I had never seen her so strong. We spent days working with Anna and Harris building our case. By the time we were done, the file was so thick it looked like it could crush a man on its own lab results. My grandfather's journal, the autopsy report, the forged documents. Every page was a blade aimed straight at my father's past. The trial began on a gray, rain-soaked morning. I sat beside my mother, holding her icy fingers while she tried to steady her breath. Thomas Carter stood in the dock looking like a ghost of the man I used to know. The arrogance was gone. The charm was gone. All that was left was a pale, tired man whose eyes had gone completely hollow. Still, he tried to deny it. I didn't do anything, he whispered weakly, his voice barely carrying through the courtroom. But the evidence was ironclad. Anna presented every piece with surgical precision: the poisoned wine, the attempted murder, the journal entries, the forensic report, the fraud. Then the prosecutor called my mother to the stand. She stood tall, her voice clear and unshaken, as she told the world what she had lived through: 3 decades of manipulation, of living under the roof of a man who had killed her father and had tried to kill her son. I watched her, my chest tightening with pride and heartbreak all at once. She stood there not as a victim, but as a survivor. Thomas didn't stand a chance. The jury took less than 2 hours to reach their verdict. Guilty. Attempted murder for what he had done to me. First-degree murder for what he had done to my grandfather. Thomas Carter was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the officers cuffed him and led him out of the courtroom, he turned one last time to look at us, my mother and me. His eyes were empty, hollow, like a man who knew he had lost everything. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel victory. I only felt the cold, gaping void where our family had once stood. After the trial, my mother packed what little she wanted to keep and moved in with me in my apartment overlooking Biscayne Bay. We sold the Carter estate soon after. Selling it wasn't just about money. It was about sealing that chapter of our lives for good. Mom found peace in the smallest things. She took up gardening on my balcony, filling the space with rows of lavender and herbs. Every afternoon, we'd sit outside with a pot of tea between us, watching the sun dip below the skyline, talking about nothing and everything. And slowly, day by day, I saw her smile return, not the forced kind she used to wear, but something real, though it carried a shadow of sadness that would probably never leave her completely. One evening, as the golden light bathed the lavender in soft orange hues, I turned to her. "Are you okay, Mom?" I asked gently. She reached for my hand, squeezing it softly. "I'm okay, Liam," she whispered. "Justice has been served. My father can finally rest in peace. And you're safe. That's all I've ever needed." And she was right. I found peace too, not in the fortune I had, not in the success people envied, but in the quiet moments we shared together, free from fear. Free from the chains my father had placed on both of us for far too long. As the last rays of sunlight touched her face, I knew we had survived the storm. We had walked through the darkness together, and we had come out the other side, together.